So this lecture addresses the beginning phase of the Peloponnesian Wars, which we will break into sort of three separate phases. This one is not like announced in 465, the Peloponnesian War start, but we just see some kind of a confluence of hostilities, particularly on the side of Athens, that sort of leads scholars to position that as the beginning date. 446, we do see an official peace, and I'll talk about that at the end. So the main source of knowledge on the Peloponnesian Wars is Thucydides. So he is very much a contemporary of the wars that are fought. He's born shortly after the outbreak. He actually participates, which we'll talk about later. He's born in Athens, so he's an Athenian citizen. He's from a fairly elite family, so we do know that he's related to Miltiades, the general who fought at the Battle of Marathon. And this gives him an ideal sort of perspective. So he actually experiences many of these events himself. And then, as he tells us in his history, he's very careful to, if he hadn't actually witnessed something, to consult those who did. So it's really an unusual source in the fact that it's his proximity to the events that he describes. According to Thucydides, and this sort of drives his narrative, the main reason for the outbreak of war is as Athens continued to attempt to expand, Sparta felt compelled to kind of check that expansion. And so ultimately the two end up in military conflict. So things in Sparta since the Persian Wars have been a little difficult. In part, we have this severe decline in the population of Spartan equals, so the Spartiate. So these are Spartan citizens. This is the mainstay not just of their governing system, but of their military. And as you can see from this graph, different scholars have come up with different numbers. Obviously, that's very difficult based on the sources that we have. They don't all agree, but what they do agree on is that decline. So in 479 BC, before the outbreak of the Peloponnesian Wars, they have about 8,000 Spartan equals. By the middle of the 4th century, that number is down to 1,000. And that's going to have really serious consequences on the ability of Sparta to move forward. This does mean that in some respects, women are able to increase their wealth. In the absence of men, women are inheriting property at higher rates. They're controlling that property. And because there are fewer men, women are expected to do more things. The flip side of that, though, is that as the number of men decline, more and more women remain unmarried because they aren't allowed to marry anyone else but a Spartan citizen. And so that becomes an issue for them. This is all compounded by a massive earthquake in 465 that destroys, it just completely levels Sparta. And the Helots take that sort of opportunity to revolt. And so Sparta is embroiled in a third Messenian war for a number of years. And things are so dire that at one point they actually request aid from Athens. So the catalyst of war, there isn't necessarily sort of one thing, but just this general sort of trajectory of Athenian expansion. And they're not like permanently successful in this first phase, but it certainly gives indications of their mindset and their plans moving forward. So one of the first things that happens is Athens occupies the city of Megara. Megara is sort of on that isthmus that connects the Peloponnesus to mainland Attica. And so it really is sort of this physical buffer against Sparta. And so they see that as sort of protecting Athens proper. Megara, however, is a member of the Peloponnesian League. And so this is a sort of an overt act of aggression. At the time, the Spartan assembly discusses whether or not they should go to war. They decide not to, in part because they're still dealing with that Helot issue, but also the Spartans are always really reluctant to go to war. It's not part of their foreign policy. They're very, very conservative. And so they just don't see this as a necessary threat. The other sort of indication of that Athenian mindset, so during this period, they also build these long walls. So they encircle the city of Athens, and then they extend all the way down to the port. These walls are like 4.5, 5 miles long. They're about 30 feet tall. And this would really kind of provide protection for Athens in the event that Attica is invaded, because you can surround the city, but you still can't cut them off from their fleet. So they could continue to provision the city, and they would also continue to have access to the fleet. And so the construction of these walls during this period, before hostilities have broken out, really does reflect that Athenian anticipation that it's going to happen. So the other sort of focus of Athenian efforts is to secure more territory in central Greece. And the issue here, excuse me, the issue here is that these are members of the Peloponnesian League. So these aren't territories that Athens should be controlling. And again, they take advantage of this Spartan reluctance to go into war to do so. So in 457, they take an army and they occupy Phocis. They also occupy areas of Boeotia, though not the city of Thebes itself. And they also extend control into Euboea. So it's some of these conquests are reversed. In 447, Boeotia is able to kind of rally a force and kick Athens out again. At this stage, Euboea and Megara also kind of try and revolt against Athenian control. Sparta does intervene at that point, and what they say to Athens is, we want a diplomatic solution to this. So you can maintain control of Euboea, we'll let you have that, but we want you out of Megara. And so Athens agrees. So this is just sort of a physical remnant of the toll that the war has been taking over the course of these decades. This is the stele. So it's carved stone, and with the inscription of the names of casualties, sort of Athenian hoplites, who have fallen in the course of battle. And there are quite a few of these that dot the landscape as sort of commemoration of men whose lives were lost, but they also give scholars a lot of insight into the toll that the war is taking on the population of Athens. So Athens is also focused on expansion into the Aegean. For the most part, a lot of these cities were already members of the Delian League. Some had tried to revolt at various times. And so Athens is just trying to really establish more firm control. And so the process here is the use of what are called clerices. So these are kind of like colonies. The individuals who move into these areas are called clerics. So they're Athenian citizens. They have all the rights and privileges of citizenship. And what they do then is they will settle a particular area. And then this way they consider themselves Athenians still. So they're firmly allied with Athens. But then they also sort of expand the trade network that Athens is able to draw upon. Many of them are port cities. So that's going to be very valuable to Athens as well. This is also a safety valve. It relieves the increased population within Athens itself and allows these people sort of opportunity to establish themselves in their own independence. One of these is the city of Thurii in Italy, which is established in 444. In 435, they will resettle Amphipolis. So there had been a community in Amphipolis. It had kind of fallen into decline. And so Athens sort of moves into the area. They kind of kick out the people who were there, and they establish control of Amphipolis, which is in the very north of the Aegean there. So in part, as a result of these kind of ongoing hostilities, in 446, Athens and Sparta negotiate what is intended to be a 30 years peace. This is the formal end to this first phase of conflict. More than anything, it really just affirms the pre-war status quo. So we saw Sparta with the Peloponnesian League really controlling the mainland, obviously the Peloponnesus, but also up into Boeotia, Corinth, and Athens with its Delian League dominating on the Aegean. Athens had tried to expand that sort of sphere of influence, but for the most part, those attempts had been checked by Sparta. And so they really do sort of go back to, this is the Peloponnesian League, this is your sphere of influence, the Aegean is Athenian sphere of influence. One of the agreements they do make, though, is to not interfere if each of those city-states is entered into conflict with one of its own allies. So, for example, some of these members of the Delian League in the past had attempted to overthrow Athenian control and establish independence. Sometimes Sparta got involved, but what Sparta says is, from here on out, if that happens, we promise not to give them support. And similarly, I don't know of too many instances when any members of the Peloponnesian League do try and leave the league, but if that were to happen, Athens will not get involved. So really, the end result of this sort of 20-year period of conflict, there's very little gain. Both sides do lose some losses, more certainly on the Athenian side, since the Spartans really do limit conflict. But going forward, we'll see that this by no means sort of ends Athenian ambition. It's just sort of a temporary pause.